The Toronto Blue Jays made some roster moves, and for Bo Bichette's case, I think 2024 is going to be a season to remember because we won't be seeing him for the rest of the year. So we'll break that down on this episode of Jays Digest, as well as a couple of other players getting their first opportunity with the club. So we'll have that and much more coming up next. Welcome in everybody to Jay's Digest. I'm your host Peter Vryonis, alongside host Nick Gosse, and today we'll be talking about the roster moves that that the Blue Jays did make regarding some of their players, some that are very well known, and some that are getting their first opportunity with the big club. But before we get into the video, Nick, I want to give a special shout out to Shohei Ohtani, who did something that we have never seen before in the game of baseball, and in a year where he's not pitching anymore, in the year where we thought, okay, this is probably going to be his worst year as a Dodger, one of his worst years as a Dodger. He finds new and improved ways to amaze us. So, regardless of whether or not the Blue Jays got him in free agency and he took us all for a ride, or JP Hornstra took us all for a ride, he did something special last night,
That
and
name is
we
forbidden.
got to we got to acknowledge it. We got to acknowledge it. So, shout out to Shohei Ohtani, which is why I'm rocking the Japan jersey today because he's truly the greatest baseball player that these two eyes have ever seen, and I can't believe what we're witnessing on a nightly basis. Imagine if he was a Blue Jay. I mean, we'd we'd all be rich. We'd all be just basking in the glory and the amazingness of Shohei, but it wasn't meant to be. Still an amazing ball player, the best player I've ever seen, and what a special feat that was last night.
Yeah, shout out to him. And discussing today, obviously, Bo Bichette. What a season to forget or remember, depending which way you think about it. Because, I mean, this has been a Jays season that we're going to remember for a while, especially as they hopefully transition into being a better team going forward. And you mentioned Shohei Ohtani. It was the offseason. It is fitting that the offseason where they go for him, they don't get him. He has the best season in MLB history, at least as a DH. So, very, very interesting. But, Peter, we heard some news, and we discussed it a couple days ago how we're excited to see Bo Bichette probably come back, build up his trade value, whatever it ends up being. He did that for about all of 9 innings, and now he is out for a while. He's out for the rest of the year. So you can see here, Bo Bichette was placed in the 10-day IL. He's out for the season. They called up Jonathan Clase, which is very encouraging. We get to see him probably play tonight, which is super exciting. But Peter, Bo Bichette, he was taking ground balls before the game a couple nights ago. Took it to his finger, ultimately fractured his finger, which is ended his season. And what a brutal season for injuries for him. What a brutal season for the Jays in general. But this is like the icing on top of what has been a brutal season. And you can throw in the Shohei Ohtani stuff into that. Obviously, it's good for baseball. It's fun to see. But he could have been, and to some people should have been, a Toronto Blue Jay. And now he's having a great year. But that's not the point of this video. The point of this video is Bo Bichette's done for the year. And unfortunately, we're not going to get to see him until 2025 or maybe never again as a Blue Jay, depending what happens here in the offseason.
Yeah, this is what I was worried about when he originally came back. That I don't think his trade value or his value as a player in general had changed whatsoever. Like I understand how bad he was this year, and I know that it's not a typical Bo Bichette season. Four stints on the injured list. I mean, it's a season from hell for him and for the Toronto Blue Jays as well. So not having him in the lineup and him performing the way that he had been, it didn't do anyone any favors. But going into the offseason where there was a lot of chatter around him and a potential trade, I don't think there was a need to rush him back. I don't think the Blue Jays did rush him back. It's just another injury chalked up to bad luck. I mean, taking a ball off your finger in pregame warmups, I mean, it doesn't get much worse than that, right? So hopefully he can make a full recovery and be back for spring training, or hopefully he can get healthy enough for a team to want to trade for him in the offseason, and it doesn't deter teams away from trying to acquire Bo Bichette. I still think he's a really good player. I still think the Jays' best chance of being competitive in 2025 is to keep him around. But at the same time, we know that he said he wants to stay, but then it came out that it may have been a leverage play at that point by Bo and his agent. Like, who knows what the actual situation is? There's no doubt that the Jays are a better team with him on the field and firing on all cylinders. But if he doesn't want to stay past next season, then you got to make that tough decision and try to swing a trade for him. But that'll be hard if he's not fully healthy and teams don't believe in his abilities 100%.
Yeah, and whether or not they trade him is going to be the big question heading into the upcoming season. Vlad spoke out on Bo and said, he's a warrior. I know he's going to come back. And obviously we know that as well. And it seems like there is a world where they do retain Bo Bichette. Maybe they extend him in the offseason. Obviously, Vladdy, who we can also touch on briefly, hit his 30th home run. And he is a phenomenal player. He's going to be extended. He's the future of the Toronto Blue Jays. But some more information on the actual injury. We'll see a specialist to determine the best course of action for healing. He'll fly to Tampa with the team, and after his in-person appointment, he will decide whether he travels back to Toronto for the final week of the season. Again, his season's over, but we need Bo Bichette to be healthy, whether it's like you mentioned for a trade, whether it's just he's a very good player when healthy. He's obviously hasn't been healthy this season, but very unfortunate. It's good to see Vladdy back up his teammate, especially with how good of a season Vladdy's having, polar opposite of what Bo Bichette is facing this year. But Peter, one of the guys you're a big fan of, and we both discussed at the trade deadline, Jonathan Clase, he is getting called up and has been called up to the Jays. We expect him to start in center field for most of the games, according to John Schneider. And if you're looking at his recent stats in AAA, he's hitting 353 over his last 7 games, the 780 OPS. He's a switch hitter, tremendous speed, like 70 grade speed, and he's really aggressive on the base paths. So he adds a different dynamic to the team. He's extremely fast, a very good defender, and he's not going to hit the cover off the ball, especially power-wise, but this is a guy that could be a very useful outfielder of the future for the Toronto Blue Jays, probably more so in the corner outfield just because we have Dalton Varsho, but they're going to want to get a look at him in center field, and maybe the future consists of him in center field and Varsho in left, depending how good his defense actually is.
Yeah, well, his routes still aren't great according to some of the scouting reports there. So I don't know if he's fully ready to take over that role full time. And Dalton Varsho is also the best defender in baseball, so
Yeah.
that helps. And he's not getting much older either. Varsho is still in the prime of his career. So as long as he's on the Blue Jays and there's no Kevin Kiermaier on the Blue Jays, I think Dalton Varsho is probably going to be playing center field. But Clase is, like you said, a very interesting player. He does have a little bit of power, but in his cup of coffee in the major leagues this year with the Seattle Mariners, kind of struggled a little bit, a lot of strikeouts, wasn't getting on base at a ridiculously high clip. So these last few games in the season remaining are going to be an evaluation period for him, for guys like Addison Barger, for a lot of the young players that are vying for spots on the team next year, because we keep hearing about competing in 2025. It's going to be really hard to do that if you have all those young guys in your lineup every night. Like, I like their outlooks as potential starters down the line, but in terms of being a competitive ball club right now, I don't know if those guys fit the bill for you right away. So it's going to be interesting to see how they play from now until the end of the season, but I wouldn't read too much into them occupying full-time spots if the Blue Jays are serious about competing in 2025. But Clase, I really like that return for Jimmy Garcia at the trade deadline. I thought just his skill set alone makes it an interesting deal for an expiring reliever. Just to get anybody back in return for Jimmy Garcia would have been a plus, in my opinion. Even though he was having a great season, you probably weren't going to retain him past 2024. So the Jays did well to recoup some assets here, and Clase was one of the top prospects in the Mariners system. So it makes sense, and I'm glad that he's finally getting his opportunity. I thought it would have come a lot sooner. I thought it would come right after the deadline, if I'm being honest with you, because what else do they have to play for? Like that's why you went out and acquired these guys, especially Class A, who has some major league experience, albeit not too much of it. But I would have liked to have seen him right away after the deadline. I feel like they delayed this a little bit too long, but it's better late than never to see him, and let's see what he can do. Give the kid a shot.
Yeah, and they're going to be testing out. And the point of this now, the rest of the season, the short season that's left, test out who we got. And I think next season, there's not too many guys, like you mentioned, prospect-wise, that will be full-timers in the Jays, besides maybe Spencer Horwitz. And there's a world where Will Wagner, if he continues to play the way he has, at least starts the
Barger.
season. But yeah, there's a lot of different guys there. But let us know in the comments what your thoughts are on this. Do you want to see Bo Bichette in a Toronto Blue Jays uniform next season, or do you think that this news is very disappointing? I would have liked to see him for the last handful of games, but if there's anything to take out of it, we get to see some of the young guys and Leo Jimenez a little bit longer, who is really good at getting hit by pitches randomly. But that'll wrap it up. Let us know your thoughts are in the comment section. We'll see you soon.